What if the world around us held secrets, secrets unseen by most, yet, deeply intertwined with our own reality? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on, a really deep dive into the fairy realm connection. Our mission is to explore this enduring phenomenon, drawing from, everything from ancient folklore right up to modern spiritual practice. We'll be delving into the very nature of this realm, its mysterious inhabitants, how humans have related to them over time, and also what psychological and cultural lenses reveal about these fascinating beliefs. We're here to uncover the often surprising and sometimes contradictory truths about this enchantment that has captivated humanity for centuries. For this journey, our sources are pretty rich and varied. We've got historical analyses, contemporary spiritual guides, academic folkloristic studies, and some truly insightful psychological perspectives. And as we begin, a key finding right away is that this fairy realm connection isn't just one single uniform idea. It's more like a vast spectrum, ranging from a subtle, almost imperceptible fairy presence to active, intentional communication with what are known as the Fae. So we've highlighted this fascinating spectrum, from that subtle presence to active engagement. Can you help us truly understand what this fairy realm connection looks like across that range?
Yeah, it's precisely that spectrum. On one end, you experience the passive fairy presence. This isn't necessarily about seeing a specific entity, but more feeling a unique energetic quality in a place. Our sources describe it as a subtle intuition, almost they call it a mild high, characterized by feelings of lightness, sanctity, otherworldliness, alliance, and contentedness. It's often associated with what are called fairy haunts in nature places, where the veil between worlds is considered thin. It's kind of akin to a mystical encounter, like feeling the presence of the divine, The Celtic term side actually encapsulates this, referring to both the otherworld and its spirits, and it's also, interestingly, a root for peace.
So a profound feeling, like you've stepped into a sacred space, but maybe without a clear visual. And then there's a more intentional interaction you mentioned.
Exactly. That's where you find conscious, deliberate engagement. This isn't accidental. It requires practice, specific techniques sometimes, to bridge the gap to the other world, which is seen as a spirit realm existing alongside but separate from our physical reality. It's a personal spiritual choice, really, undertaken for growth, knowledge, and a deeper communion with unseen worlds.
And what's particularly striking, reading through the sources, is how profoundly non-rational this experience is often described. They emphasize that the fairy world doesn't operate on human logic, which makes genuine experiences incredibly difficult to articulate. People are often, rendered speechless.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that this non-rational quality is a primary source of both its allure and, frankly, its cautionary tales. It can be enchanting, absolutely, but also deeply unsettling for those rooted in a rational worldview. The fairy presence often has this luminous, dazzling quality that can shift a person into an ecstatic state, which sounds very similar to what mystics describe when they try to articulate profound encounters.
Right. Given that intensity, what are some of the deeper reasons, both historically and maybe now, that humans have sought this unique connection?
Well, it's multifaceted. A core driver seems to be cultivating a more profound relationship with the natural world. Fae are often seen as spirits of place, the genius loci, and connecting with them is a way to honor the innate magic of local environments, maybe heightening awareness of seasons and the land itself.
That really resonates, especially with our, modern disconnect from nature sometimes.
Definitely. Beyond that, it's sought for spiritual and personal growth. The Fae are believed to exist in a less dense spirit world, offering powerful and enlightening perspectives, maybe leading to deeper self-knowledge. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's also a form of spiritual ecology.
Oh, okay.
This isn't just like a revival of old beliefs. It's a significant cultural response to what some call the disenchantment of the modern world. Historically, like in the Victorian era during industrialization, interest in fairies surged as a reaction against all those societal changes. Now, it's maybe a yearning to re-enchant nature and restore sacredness, particularly in an age of ecological crisis. I mean, the 20th Century Fairy Investigation Society even recognized fairies as guardians of an ecologically damaged world. And you see contemporary authors framing them as actively helping to clean the environment. Across cultures, what's really fascinating is that this realm is consistently conceptualized as a parallel reality. It's like a dimension that coexists with our own, yet remains mostly unseen. It goes by so many names. the Celtic Cid, which refers to the fairy mounds themselves, or Tir na Nog, the land of the young.
Right, I've heard that one.
Yeah, and you might also hear it called fairyland, or sometimes even the underworld. The term fairy itself is interesting because it denotes not just the inhabitants, but also the whole ineffable atmosphere that surrounds them.
And one of the most consistent and, well, defining characteristics of this other world is its radically altered relationship with time and space. What are the implications of that? It sounds risky.
Oh, definitely risky from a human perspective. The temporality of the otherworld is non-linear and, yeah, incredibly perilous. Folklore around the globe warns that time runs differently there. What feels like maybe just a single night of revelry could equate to years, even centuries, passing back in our mortal world.
Wow.
A really well-known example is the Japanese legend of Urashi Mataro. He's a fisherman who visits an undersea palace and returns to find centuries have passed. Everyone he knew is gone.
So this lost time motif, it isn't just a literal warning, is it? Feels like it carries a deeper symbolic weight.
I think it does. It serves as a powerful mythological metaphor for the psychological experience of altered states of consciousness.
Oh.
Things like deep meditation or shamanic journeying, which are often designed to induce such states. Mystical experiences often dissolve that normal, linear perception of time we rely on. So the individual who returns from such a state is often fundamentally changed, and the mundane world they left behind can feel alien, reflecting a significant internal transformation. And another critical rule, almost universal, is the prohibition against consuming its food or drink. Legends state that partaking of fairy sustenance will trap you there forever.
Okay, so definitely don't accept the snacks. And how do people typically access this realm? Is it just open to anyone, or are there specific conditions?
No, access is generally considered limited to specific in-between times and places, what we often call liminal spaces.
Liminal, right.
Yeah, temporal gateways include solstices, equinoxes, new moons, and that magical daily transition of dusk. Spatially, we're talking about ancient mounds or side, stone circles, fairy rings, mushroom circles, specific trees like the hawthorn wells, and bridges over natural streams. These are often the very same places described as fairy haunts, where that unique fairy presence is felt most strongly.
It's remarkable that this idea of a parallel spirit world isn't just Celtic, though. It seems to echo across so many cultures.
It truly does. It's quite striking. Take the Australian Aboriginal concept of the dream time, for instance. It describes an eternal, uncreated dimension that exists outside of physical time and space. And within that tradition, the Mimi spirits are said to be mediators from this other dimension. They were contacted at sacred stones and mountains and supposedly taught essential skills to the first Aboriginal tribes. This is conceptually analogous, really, to the non-ordinary realities visited by shamans during ecstatic trance, which are populated by non-corporeal entities offering wisdom or healing. These cross-cultural parallels strongly suggest it's a fundamental element of how humans understand consciousness and reality itself.
Beyond the realm itself, the beings within it are just as diverse. I've always heard fairy used so broadly, but our sources suggest that's really just the tip of the iceberg, don't they?
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds like it's a broad, often misleading classification for a vast and diverse population of otherworldly beings, varying wildly in appearance, temperament, origin.
That's exactly right. Folkloric and theological traditions offer multiple, often contradictory explanations for their existence. It gets complicated. One prominent theory, especially in Irish mythology, traces the Fae to the Tuatha De Danann.
Right, the godlike race.
Yes, a powerful supernatural race who, after being defeated by mortals, supposedly retreated into hollow hills, becoming the Eos Sea or the Sidhi. These are often depicted as noble, powerful, but also dangerous.
And then, with the rise of Christianity, there was a whole new explanation that emerged, trying to fit them into that worldview.
Yes, a very popular Christian theory, particularly in Scotland and Ireland, posited that fairies were demoted angels. The idea was they were the angels who refused to take sides during Lucifer's rebellion. So they were cast out of heaven but weren't evil enough for hell, condemned to dwell in between, right here on earth. This also explains the rather grim folkloric tradition of fairies having to pay a taint or a tithe of their own people to hell every 7 years.
Wow, that's dark. There are even theories that fairyland was a pre-Christian afterlife, right? For pagans or unbaptized dead. Or that fairies are simply nature spirits.
Indeed. The afterlife idea connects them to ancestor veneration, and the nature spirit or elemental idea is very popular today, influenced by figures like Paracelsus. Though folklorists often caution that this might be an oversimplification of older beliefs, where fairies were seen as a distinct race, not just, personified nature forces. And then there's the intriguing euhemeristic theory, the idea that they might be a distorted folk memory of an ancient human race, maybe smaller or technologically different, driven into hiding.
So many possibilities.
Yeah.
But regardless of their origin, a critical and consistent theme that comes through loud and clear is that the Fae are not governed by human ideas of good and evil. They have their own inscrutable logic and alien moral code, which makes them profoundly unpredictable and, frankly, dangerous. How does that usually manifest in their interactions?
Well, they're described across the board as capable of great benevolence and shocking cruelty, almost in the same breath. Capricious, impulsive, sometimes like a powerful, unrestrained child. Their interactions with humans are often strictly transactional, based on a rigid code of reciprocity and respect. They might reward a clean home or offerings of milk, but they'll punish slights or messiness with equal swiftness. It's all about balance, but their balance, not ours.
And this belief in hidden, non-human beings with their own rules, it's truly global. We see echoes of this everywhere.
We really do. While the Celtic traditions are perhaps the most famous in the West, you have the Huldufolk, or hidden people in Scandinavia, who live in parallel and demand respect. Then there are the incredibly diverse yokai of Japan, a huge category of supernatural monsters and spirits ranging from mischievous tricksters like the Kappa to truly malevolent beings like the Yuki-onna.
Right.
You've got the Mimi spirits of Australian Aboriginal lore, those extremely thin, ancient spirits said to teach survival skills. And even closer to home for some listeners, maybe a Pukwudgie from the Wampanoag people of New England, small, human-like tricksters, often quite dangerous in the old stories.
It's amazing. This widespread belief really demonstrates a universal, maybe archetypal, feature of human consciousness, appearing in diverse yet structurally similar forms across the globe.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the way humans have perceived these beings, these fairies, has shifted dramatically over time. It really acts as a kind of cultural barometer. Their nature isn't some fixed fact. It's a concept that's been continuously renegotiated by human society through the ages.
So tracing that back, if we go way back to pre-Christian antiquity, what were these beings like then? How were they understood?
Well, our sources tell us that the origins of fairy belief are truly ancient, probably tracing back to pre-Celtic, even Neolithic times. The beings who would eventually become known as fairies were likely seen as powerful, almost godlike entities, often linked to sacred mounds, burial sites, and ancestors, the Don Sieth, the people of the mounds.
So powerful and maybe scary.
Definitely powerful, amoral by human standards, commanding worship, and a healthy dose of fear. You find analogous figures in other ancient cultures. Greek nymphs and satyrs, the Arabic jinni, Roman penates, or the lairs, household spirits demanding respect.
Then Christianity arrived and brought a really significant shift in how they were perceived, didn't it?
Oh, fundamentally, it transformed fairy lore. As the new monotheistic religion sought to consolidate its authority across Europe, it couldn't just ignore these deeply ingrained pagan beliefs, so it demonized them, systematically recasting fairies as malevolent entities, demons, fallen angels, illusions created by Satan to tempt the faithful.
Wow.
King James I of England, in his 1597 treatise Demonology, explicitly classified fairies as demonic spirits who consorted with witches. This also involves syncretism, where pagan sacred sites associated with these beings were co-opted, reconsecrated, or sometimes even reimagined as entrances to hell itself.
Yet, despite that pretty intense condemnation, they certainly persisted, didn't they? Especially in folk culture and literature during the medieval and Renaissance periods.
They absolutely did. They were too deeply embedded. You see them in the works of Geoffrey Chaucer, and perhaps most famously, William Shakespeare. In plays like A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare befriends a whole fairy court, but he significantly softened their traditional malevolence, making them more mischievous, whimsical, and capricious rather than outright terrifying.
Right, Oberon and Titania.
Exactly. And of course, in Arthurian legends, you have figures like Morgan Le Fay and the Lady of the Lake who exist in this liminal space, bridging the human world and the otherworld. Then we get to the Victorian era, which saw this massive resurgence of interest in fairies, but with a radical transformation, a real Baudelarization.
Baudelarization, you mean cleaned up?
completely cleaned up. The powerful, dangerous, often human-sized beings of old folklore were largely replaced by the diminutive, delicate, winged sprites we now typically associate with children's books and cartoons. Think Tinkerbell, though even she had a temper. Theosophical circles at the time further promoted their angelic nature, recasting them as benevolent devas or nature spirits guiding natural processes. A far cry from the old tales.
This evolution, from ancient fearsome deities to these tiny winged helpers and now maybe ecological guardians, it's truly striking. What do you think this profound cultural and psychological renegotiation of the fairy figure tells us about our own changing relationship with nature, and maybe even with our own anxieties?
Oh, it tells us a great deal. It shows how flexible these concepts are. Even into the 20th century, the belief persisted. Remember the Cottingley fairies photograph?
Oh yeah, the ones that fooled Sir Arthur Conan Doyle?
Exactly. And the founding of the Fairy Investigation Society in 1927 shows serious interest continued. And now, in modern spirituality, as we touched on, fairies are often seen very differently again, as divine messengers, guardians of nature, or spiritual guides. Rather than fearing them, many people actively seek their presence for spiritual upliftment, healing, and that deeper connection to the planet. It really is a fluid cultural projection, reflecting our deepest hopes and fears, adapting to new societal needs and anxieties, particularly ecological ones now.
So given that historical fear and unpredictability, how did our ancestors deal with these beings, and how do people approach them today, especially if they're seeking that connection? It sounds like the traditional realm was not a whimsical paradise. It was genuinely perilous.
It absolutely was. Interaction was governed by a complex and pretty rigid set of protocols born out of fear as much as respect. These beings were considered powerful, unpredictable, and potentially lethal if offended. The foundational principle was absolute respect. They were rarely called fairies directly, as that could be seen as disrespectful or summoning. Instead, people used euphemistic titles like the good people, the fair folk, the gentry, even the good neighbors in Scotland. These were placatory, not terms of affection.
Right, trying not to offend them. And there were all sorts of traditional protective measures, things to ward them off or keep safe.
Oh yes, a whole toolkit. The most famous repellent is iron, specifically cold iron, believed to be painful or harmful to them. People would put iron objects over cradles or doorways. Certain plants, like St. John's wort and yarrow, were considered powerful protective herbs. And finding a four-leaf clover was said to grant the ability to see through fairy glamour or illusions. Conversely, you absolutely could not harm plants sacred to them, like hawthorn or foxglove, or you'd risk their wrath. Other protections included the sound of church bells, which supposedly drove them away. And a simple, maybe slightly embarrassing trick was to turn your clothing inside out, believed to confuse or repel them.
So a quick wardrobe malfunction was your best defense against the fae.
Yep.
Okay. And the etiquette around offerings and gifts was equally delicate, wasn't it?
Very much so. Common offerings like milk, cream, bread, and honey were left out, often on the doorstep or hearth. But here's the really critical rule you find repeated everywhere. You must never explicitly say thank you for a gift or a service from a fairy.
Never say thank you. That's counterintuitive.
What? It was seen as settling the debt, like closing a transaction. This ended the relationship and could cause deep offense, as if you were dismissing their generosity or power. Gratitude was shown through continued offerings and respect, not through words that imply finality. And gifts from them were equally treacherous. Fairy gold might vanish or turn into leaves or dust the next morning, or even carry a curse.
Yeah, looking at the folklore, the do's and don'ts really underscore the fear and careful negotiation. Like you said, do leave offerings, but don't say thank you.
Okay.
Do use respectful titles, but don't call them fairies directly. Do carry iron or maybe turn your coat inside out for protection, but absolutely don't eat or drink anything offered in fairyland because that will trap you there forever.
Yeah.
And the gravest dangers were really serious. Changelings, where infants were believed to be abducted and replaced with a sickly or strange fairy substitute, maybe an old explanation for certain childhood illnesses or developmental differences.
Right. And the abduction of adults, especially new mothers or talented musicians and craftspeople, taken to fairyland for years. Fairies were also blamed for unexplained illnesses, elf shot, or a fairy blast before germ theory. And they were known for using will-o'-the-wisps to lead travelers astray into bogs or forests, not friendly guides, usually.
That's such a stark contrast to many modern practices. How do people approach forging this connection today if they're actively seeking it?
Well, in modern esoteric practices, the intention is usually quite different. It's about actively forging a positive connection, often blending elements of folklore with techniques from broader spiritual systems like Wicca or New Age practices. It typically starts with setting a clear, polite intention, clarifying your purpose for seeking contact, and often stating you only wish to connect with beings who have your highest and best intentions. That's a common safeguard. Creating a dedicated sacred space is also crucial, either outdoors in nature or maybe an indoor altar. Cleansing the space beforehand, maybe with smudging or just tidying, is common too.
And altars and offerings still play a role, even now.
Yes, the ancient tradition of offerings definitely continues, often focused around a specially created altar. People might decorate it with crystals, flowers, bells, maybe figurines. The offerings themselves are often consistent with folklore. Cakes, honey, milk, shiny things. And fairy gardens, miniature gardens designed as welcoming spaces, have become really popular. For actual contact, nature immersion is key. Spending conscious, intentional time in nature, being open and looking for signs, unusual light patterns, formations, unexpected scents or sounds. Meditation and journey work are also very common techniques. Grounding oneself, entering a deep meditative state, and visualizing a doorway or path to the otherworld, perhaps seeking a specific fairy guide.
So it's much more about actively seeking and inviting rather than just passively experiencing that presence or, warding them off. What about more formalized technique?
Precisely. More formalized rituals might involve creating a fairy circle with stones or flowers, ringing small bells, playing specific types of enchanting music. Some use traditional poetry or invocations. There are even energetic attunement exercises described in some guides, like one called Becoming the Fairy Tree, where you visualize roots going into the earth and branches reaching to the sky, drawing energy into your heart to align with the land. But and this is crucial, despite the modern focus on positive connection, many contemporary teachings still echo that ancient wisdom about caution.
Ah, okay. So it's not all just welcoming them with open arms?
Not entirely, no. There's usually strong advice about setting boundaries, about not assuming benevolence just because you're being polite. The core message remains. The Fae are not human, they lack human morality, and their help or interaction, even if well-intentioned from their perspective, could inadvertently cause harm or disruption in a human life. So, seekers are often encouraged to read the traditional folklore before attempting contact, to ensure they understand the unpredictable, sometimes hostile nature depicted in the older tales, and approach with respect and discernment.
That makes sense. It's a complex relationship. This brings us to a really fascinating part of our deep dive. How do psychology and folklore actually explain the enduring belief in fairies? What does a Jungian perspective, for example, tell us about why these stories stick around?
Well, psychology, particularly Jungian thought, offers some intriguing insights. Jungians often view fairy tales as some of the purest expressions of the collective unconscious, revealing universal archetypes that resonate deeply with the human psyche. The hero's journey, the wise old woman, the dark forest. These elements appear everywhere. The dark forest itself can be seen as a symbol for the unconscious mind, a place where you confront shadow elements to find wholeness. And the fairy realm itself might symbolize the unconscious.
And thinking about children, from a developmental psychology standpoint, these stories are actually quite important, aren't they? Not just entertainment.
They truly are. Far from being trivial, fairy tales are seen as vital tools for children. They allow kids to safely explore complex emotions and conflicts by projecting them onto villains or challenging situations. They learn about resilience, developing autonomy, overcoming adversity, all crucial developmental tasks packaged in metaphor. Cognitive psychology also weighs in, suggesting that paranormal belief, including belief in fairies, might be an evolutionary byproduct of our theory of mind.
Our ability to understand that others have minds, intentions.
Exactly. Our ability to attribute consciousness and intention to others, which we might naturally overextend to unseen agents in the environment. And interestingly, some recent studies have even linked paranormal belief, perhaps counterintuitively for some, to positive well-being outcomes, providing a sense of meaning, acting as a coping mechanism, fostering a positive outlook.
So it's not just about what we believe, but maybe why we believe it, and how that belief serves us psychologically. And what's particularly current is that folklorists are actively tracking modern sightings as well, right? Adding a contemporary layer to this.
They are, yeah. Dr. Simon Young's Fairy Census Project, for instance, has collected hundreds of first-hand accounts from recent decades. It shows belief is still surprisingly widespread, though there's a persistent gender imbalance. Women report sightings significantly more often than men. But perhaps the most significant finding from this modern data is a fundamental shift in the perceived character of the Fae.
How so?
The overwhelmingly malicious, dangerous, often terrifying fae of old folklore have been largely replaced in these modern accounts by benevolent, gentle, helpful nature spirits. People report seeing them tending flowers, looking ethereal, or maybe engaging in harmless mischief like hiding keys. It's a profound change from the old tales.
Wow, from stealing babies and causing illness to hiding car keys. That's quite a shift. And these modern sightings, they even occur in incongruous industrial contexts sometimes, like near cars or washing machines. That really speaks to how adaptable the belief is.
It does, though the experiences themselves are often very subjective, fleeting peripheral glimpses, flashes of light, vague supernatural feelings, sometimes paralleling experiences children describe with invisible friends. And this really raises the most important question, perhaps the single most critical concept for a nuanced understanding we need to grasp, this fundamental contradiction between historical folklore and modern beliefs.
Right, the split.
Exactly. There's a real schism, as some folklorists call it. On one side, you have the traditional fae, objects of terror, dealt with through careful negotiation and appeasement. On the other, the modern fae, largely sanitized, romanticized, seen as loving guardians, sources of healing, almost angelic nature spirits. This divergence is often attributed to that historical demonization by religion, followed by the heavy romanticization, especially in the Victorian era. And ignoring this split risks misunderstanding the phenomenon entirely, either by naively approaching potentially dangerous traditional entities based on modern, gentle portrayals, or maybe by engaging with what might be more of a modern thought form shaped by recent literature, rather than an ancient spirit described in folklore. It's a crucial distinction.
That really clarifies things. Since we're talking about connection to unseen realms generally, how do fairies fit in with other kinds of spiritual entities people talk about, like angels or spirit guides? There seem to be clear distinctions, aren't there, even if they get lumped together sometimes?
Yes, absolutely. While they sometimes get grouped under a general spiritual beings umbrella, especially in New Age contexts, traditional understanding, and even many modern esoteric systems draw clear distinctions. They have distinct natures, origins, and modes of interaction, primarily defined by their relationship to Earth and humanity. Angels, for example, are generally understood as celestial, divine beings. High vibrational beings of pure light, as some sources put it, who have never incarnated physically on Earth.
Okay, so fundamentally not of this world.
Exactly. They're seen as direct creations or messengers of a singular divine source embodying unconditional love. Their primary purpose is often described as transmitting divine love, guidance, and energy down to humanity, providing hope, protection, and support, especially in times of crisis.
And spirit guides, how do they differ from angels? They seem more personal.
Yeah, personal is a good way to put it. Spirit guides are generally seen as more experiential. They've often lived past lives here on Earth, whether as humans or sometimes animals. So their wisdom is rooted in lived experience, giving them perhaps a more direct, empathetic understanding of human challenges and the learning process. This category is incredibly vast. It can include ancestors, deceased loved ones who offer guidance, ascended masters, even deities from various pantheons who act as guides. Their purpose is usually focused on helping an individual navigate their specific life path, learn soul lessons, and they might offer both practical and mystical information relevant to everyday issues. More like mentors, maybe.
Okay, so angels are divine messengers, guides are experienced mentors. Where do fairies fit into that spectrum then? They sound quite different from both.
They really are distinct from both angels and spirit guides in most frameworks. Fairies, or the fae, are fundamentally terrestrial. They are an independent race, intrinsically tied to the natural world, the physical planet. They're often described as spirits of place, the consciousness of the land itself, the streams, the mountains, the forests. Crucially, their existence isn't seen as contingent on humanity, and their primary concern is generally understood to be the well-being of the planet, the ecosystem, not necessarily individual human spiritual development.
Ah, so their focus is different.
Completely. They have their own societies, their own rules, their own morality, which, as we've discussed, is often alien and inscrutable to human understanding. Interaction with them is less about mentorship or receiving divine love and more akin to establishing a diplomatic relationship with a foreign and powerful culture. It's conditional, requiring that strict etiquette, respect, and offerings often related to their territory or domain. And unlike angels, who are almost universally seen as benevolent, fairies retain that moral ambiguity we talked about: capricious, potentially dangerous, their motives unclear. Their guidance, when offered, is usually focused specifically on our relationship with nature and the land.
That's a really helpful breakdown. So you're looking for guidance. Your choice of entity, or perhaps the entity that reaches out to you, might truly reflect your deepest spiritual priorities. whether those are, theological, focused on personal development, or rooted in an ecological connection. Wow. Our journey through the fairy realm connection has been, well, pretty fascinating. We've seen it's this incredibly rich tapestry, a whole spectrum of experience from that subtle background presence to very active, intentional engagement. It's a phenomenon that has profoundly shifted over centuries, hasn't it? From these feared ancient deities to demonic figures, then cleaned up romanticized sprites, and now even emerging as ecological guardians in some views. This evolution really highlights a profound cultural and psychological renegotiation of the fairy figure over time. It creates the critical distinction we discussed between the fae of old, terrifying folklore and the often much gentler fae of modern spiritual belief. A distinction worth remembering. The enduring fascination with the fairy realm, I think, speaks to a timeless human need for wonder, for imagination, and for a sense of enchantment in a world that can often feel, well, pretty mundane. So here's a final thought. Perhaps the deepest fairy realm connection we can cultivate isn't just about reaching out to some external realm, but maybe about connecting with a wild, untamed magic that still resides within our own psyches and in the incredible natural world all around us. Maybe it's about inviting ourselves to see the sacred in the mundane, the extraordinary in the ordinary, and the hidden depths in ourselves. What will you choose to explore next?